Hi, and welcome to another session of Devotion in Motion, an adventure in embodied spirituality. A few people have asked me, well, why are you spending time now on embodied spirituality? What's so important about doing this now? And one of the things that I'm noticing, it is May 2020, in the middle of the pandemic, coronavirus pandemic. And churches have been closed for approximately 8 weeks. So what I'm noticing is that people are hungering for ways to connect with their own spirituality at home. That's one of the things that when there's really, in a sense, two general categories of spiritual development. One is the practice of community, and in the practice of community is service. So it's a community of faith praying together and doing service together. So one pathway toward living the life that God intended for us is a path primarily of community and service. The other pathway, which is less known in the West, especially less known since the 1500s, is the way of devotion or monasticism or reflection or solitude. So you might think of one as the inner way and the other as the outer way. Both excellent pathways to God. And in my belief, we really need both. That both are, having some of both is important for our spirituality to be well-rounded. However, for people in the West who primarily were developing their spirituality through the path of community, this time of pandemic has been particularly painful and difficult. They've been cut off from community, and so they're cut off from spirituality. And I'm finding in people a deep longing to look for other ways to connect. And the inner path is a path that you can do in a solitary way or with people in your own family. And it's a way that's embodied, as we've talked about in other sessions. Embodied spirituality is development of spirituality that embraces the totality of yourself, that doesn't project negative or sinful connotations onto the body, but sees the body basically as a neutral thing or as a vehicle to going deeper inside. It honors the body for its own kind of wisdom and understanding. So the reason why I'm doing this now, I think, is that it's to answer this call. My own sense of spiritual development from a fairly early age has been that inner path. So I've been working on these, learning these, experimenting with these techniques for probably since I was 28. So that's a long time in terms of my lifetime. And now it feels like the time to share them in a more open way. So that's why I'm talking about embodied spirituality now. And I'm calling this devotion in motion because it is embodied. So that's the motion part. But the whole purpose of it is not just moving your body. It's an invitation to go deeper spiritually. So it's devotion through motion, or devotion in motion. And then the tagline that I like is an experiment in embodied spirituality, because it's all an experiment. Some things work for some people and don't work for other people. So what I'm inviting you to do, especially during this time of pandemic, and especially if you're a person whose primary vehicle to develop your spirituality has been the pathway of community, I'm really encouraging you to experiment and try on a few of these devotion in motion activities and just see if they help feed your soul in the meantime. As soon as the community path is open again, you'll be fully able to go back and experience that. But during this time of pandemic, I really invite you to try a few on for size. And just let this be a time when you let yourself notice what this other pathway, this inner pathway of development feels like. So that's why I'm doing it now. So this particular session is about a salutation. And so the salutation is about how we begin our spiritual time. Most people in the West, when I've interviewed them and I ask them, what is your spiritual practice? They say things like, well, I get a cup of coffee and I get the little pamphlet from my denomination, the little booklet, the daily word, the living word, guidepost, something that has a daily reading for the day, and some kind of a Bible devotion. So they get their cup of coffee, they go to their chair. Most people have kind of a prayer chair or a prayer corner or a place that they like to sit when they do their spiritual devotions in the morning. And so they go and they read that pamphlet. They'll perhaps read the corresponding scriptures. They'll pray, and that will be their spiritual practice. But you notice when you look at that spiritual practice, it's a wonderful spiritual practice. My grandparents' spiritual practice was that, and they were incredibly devoted every day. Their morning devotions actually happened at the breakfast table, and it was my grandfather's job to clear away the dishes after my grandmother had made the breakfast. So they would sit at the table and they would get out their Bible and their booklet from their denomination, and that was their spiritual practice every day. But there's nothing in that practice that's embodied, right? You're in a sense, it's really spiritual practice for your brain, but it's not a spiritual practice that integrates your wholeness. So I'd like to just tell you about the salutation that I've developed over the years. And as many of you know, my spiritual practice has been largely influenced by Indigenous people in North America. So I've been mostly influenced. I was born in Nebraska, so the people of the Sioux Nation have have that ancestral connection to them. And then I also have, I lived in the Pacific Northwest, so the Chinook are a group of people, and the Salutation are groups of people that I've been hugely influenced by as well. And then the third group that have really influenced me are the people of the Southwest, the Navajo Nation and the Pueblo Nation. So my salutation, the way that I start my prayer time every day, is an embodied practice that reflects something similar, or it's influenced by my study of these practices. It's not exactly like any one of those practices. There are some people who practice yoga, which is an embodied spiritual practice. And I enjoy doing yoga, and I find myself relaxing. But I'm also a follower of Jesus, and there's nothing that helps me focus on that part of my spirituality in something like the practice of yoga in and of itself. I have to bring that part. So what I've added to some of the indigenous practices is a sense of my spirituality related to being a follower of Jesus. So you'll see that in the practice that I'm going to teach you, you'll see both of these flavors and both of these elements mixed together. There is absolutely nothing magical about this practice. I'm showing it to you as an example so that you will develop your own practice.